Okay, so you're diving into beginner English. And today we're going to tackle something that I think even trips up native speakers sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is saying where things are.
Right. And it's more than just like knowing the words.
Where?
It's that logic behind how English puts those sentences together.
Yes.
And we've got some excerpts from this beginner English podcast lesson.
Okay.
That dives right into those tricky spots.
Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
So our source kicks off with a challenge I think a lot of Spanish speakers face.
Yeah.
Which is this whole ser versus a star thing.
Right.
Which is how we used to be in English.
And it's fascinating because in English, to be does double duty.
It does.
It can be to be as in the essence of something.
Right.
So like Madrid is a city.
Yeah.
But it's also how we say Madrid is in Spain.
Right.
Same verb, two different concepts.
Yeah. Which I imagine can feel like having the rug pulled out from under you.
Absolutely.
When you're first learning English.
And our source really zeroes in on using to be.
Okay.
For location specifically.
Which is a great segue to our next point, which is the word where itself.
Yes.
I love how this lesson doesn't just throw the word out.
Yeah.
It actually breaks down the pronunciation.
Right. They recommend thinking of it as two sounds.
Right.
Way plus
Way plus
And it sounds a little strange when you first say it that way, but if you say it a few times, you really help it click.
It's like when you realize that the air sound pops up in all sorts of words.
Right.
Chair, hair, bear.
Exactly.
It makes you hear the connection between the sounds.
Yeah. And I think the source makes a really good point here.
Yeah.
Which is that getting pronunciation right, especially at the beginner level, can be such a confidence booster.
Absolutely.
It's not just about being understood.
Right.
It's about feeling comfortable speaking.
Totally.
Okay, let's move on to a classic English language brain twister.
Okay.
Which is in versus on.
Absolutely.
I swear, English prepositions are their own special kind of challenge.
They're these tiny little words that can completely change the meaning of a sentence.
Yes.
And our source tackles this head on.
They do.
With a really clear explanation.
Yeah.
In equals inside.
Okay.
On equals on top of.
I like it.
Simple, right?
Yeah.
But then they hit you with this great image.
Yes.
A cat in a car versus a cat on a car.
It's so funny.
I know.
Like picturing a cat just chilling on the roof of a car.
Right.
It cracks me up every time.
Yeah.
But it makes you remember it.
It does.
Okay, so now on to another small but mighty word.
Okay.
The.
Yes.
Now, I know a lot of languages have direct translations for them.
Right.
But there's some interesting nuances in English that our source points out.
And they do?
They highlight a rule that I think trips up a lot of beginners.
Yeah.
Which is that the is used for words that start with a vowel sound.
Yes.
Not just a vowel.
The vowel sound is key.
And that's such a subtle difference.
Right.
But it makes a huge impact.
Absolutely.
On how natural your English sounds.
It really does.
Right.
For example, we say the apple.
Right.
Because it sounds like the apple. Not just because it starts with the letter A.
Right.
But what about a word like hour?
Oh, that's a good one. Because it starts with a vowel.
Yeah.
But the sound is more like O.
Exactly.
So we say the hour.
Yes.
Not the hour.
Precisely.
And these are the kinds of details that can really, I think, help you fine-tune your understanding and start to sound more fluent.
Absolutely.
And those little details add up.
They do.
Especially when it comes to feeling confident, speaking English in different situations.
For sure. And speaking of different situations, our source doesn't just focus on making statements.
Okay.
It also dives into how to form questions.
Yes.
Using all these concepts that we've been talking about.
Which is huge for beginners. Because being able to ask, where is the bin?
Right.
Is essential for navigating the world around you.
Exactly. It's one thing to understand a statement.
Right.
But being able to formulate a question shows a much deeper level of comprehension.
Okay. I'm loving this deep dive so far.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But I also feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, we've still got plenty to explore.
We do.
What's great about this source is it doesn't just give examples of questions.
Right.
It actually breaks down the why behind the structure.
Yes. Like, why do we say, where is the pen?
Right.
And not where the pen is.
Exactly. And it's about understanding word order in English questions.
Yeah.
Which can be really tricky for learners coming from languages with different grammatical rules.
Totally.
But once you get that aha moment, it's like, Okay.
Right.
A code has been cracked.
Totally. Speaking of codes, it feels like mastering any language is kind of like that.
It
We're
is.
constantly unlocking these new levels.
Right. And sometimes those levels involve unlearning old habits.
How interesting.
Yeah. And our source material does a really good job, I think, of pointing this out.
Okay.
With a common pronunciation error with the word bottle.
Okay.
It highlights how English speakers pronounce that T sound very clearly.
Right.
Whereas Spanish speakers might use more of a soft D.
Oh, that's so interesting. I never even thought about that before. But now that you mention it, I can totally hear the difference.
It's subtle, but it's important.
It is.
And the source material does a good job of connecting it back.
Okay.
To other words that we've talked about, like street.
Yeah.
That consistent T sound is key.
Okay, so we've talked about statements, questions.
Uh-huh.
What about when you want to say that something is not in a location?
The power of negation.
Yes.
Our source material definitely does not shy away from that.
Good.
It really emphasizes the importance of practicing negative sentences as well.
Okay.
Because it's one thing to say the book is on the table.
Right.
But being able to confidently say the book is not on the table demonstrates a whole other level, I think, of understanding.
And it reminds me of something else the source does well, which is repetition.
Yes.
It doesn't just like introduce a concept and then move on.
Right.
It keeps revisiting key phrases and structures throughout the lesson.
Which is so crucial, right?
It is.
For language learning.
Repetition is key.
Repetition is key.
Cementing those neural pathways.
Yes. It's like building muscle memory, but for your brain.
Exactly. And the more you encounter a word or a grammatical structure in different contexts, the more natural it becomes.
Right. And speaking of making things natural, I love how this source material isn't afraid to get really specific with its examples.
Give me an example.
So it goes beyond just generic objects and locations.
Okay.
Like it uses the example of a house.
Okay.
And it even introduces the word center.
Right.
To create a more precise sentence.
Right.
Like, my house is in the center of the city.
Right. Or my bottle is in the center of the table. Whatever it is.
Yeah. And it encourages learners to practice with objects and locations that are relevant to their own lives.
Right.
It even uses the example of a bottle, which is something we all have around us.
Yes, we do.
I feel like that personal connection can make a big difference.
It can.
And how well you retain the information.
Totally. Okay. Before we move on to our final part of our deep dive, there's one more thing I want to highlight from this lesson.
What's that?
Which is the way that it emphasizes active listening.
Okay.
So it's constantly using phrases like, can you see it?
Right.
Because you notice that?
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're right there with you.
Yeah.
Guiding you through the learning process. It's like having a really good teacher, right?
Yes.
They're not just lecturing at you. They're drawing you in, making sure you're really grasping it.
It makes all the difference.
It does.
In language learning.
Yeah.
You know, it's not enough to just hear the information.
Right.
You have to actively process it.
Yes.
And make it your own.
Totally.
And I think this source material does such a good job.
It does.
Of modeling that active learning approach.
It really does. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We talked about tricky verbs, confusing prepositions, the subtle art of using the correctly.
Right.
We even delved into pronunciation and sentence structure.
We did.
I love how this beginner English lesson it doesn't shy away from the complexities.
It doesn't delay it. No, it acknowledges the challenges, but it also breaks them down into manageable steps.
Yes.
And it reminds me that progress isn't always about these big dramatic leaps forward.
Right.
Sometimes it's about mastering the nuances.
Yes.
Those seemingly small distinctions that can make a world of difference.
Totally.
In how natural and fluent you sound.
So for all of you listening right now, if you're maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by all the ins and outs of English,
that's a lot.
Remember that every small step you take is still a step forward.
Absolutely.